Philip K. Dick's novel Ubik, one of the important features are what are called Prudence organizations, and Runciter Associates is perhaps the most important of these, certainly the most important to the plot, since almost all of the characters belong to Runciter Associates or are opposed to it or are hiring it for one thing or another. And Runciter himself in chapter 5 is going to say, I've been in this business a long time. This is my contribution to contemporary civilization. In a contemporary civilization that is, relatively speaking, past to us, but definitely a future to Dick's own time. And what is going on there? So one way we could describe it is that a Prudence organization hires what are called inertials, who are anti-psionic talents, who then nullify or offset the talents of people who have psionic abilities for telepathy, precognition, and a variety of other things as well. Now, the Prudence organizations will on occasion also hire telepaths or precogs of their own, but for the most part, their business model is keeping those talents from being used against those who are hiring them. And we get some interesting reflections on this, as well as some advertisements that we'll look at in a bit. And I do want to mention that Joe Chip in chapter 3, when he's talking with Pat Connolly, has a sort of complementary discourse. It's rather short, where he talks about how the anti-psis are protecting the normal people against the psionic talents. And we do see Runciter saying, you know what Ray Hollis is the one who has the firm that employs all of these psionic talents. Do you know what he says about us? He says that we're trying to turn the clock back to an earlier state of humanity. So we should start by talking about these advertisements, and we get the very first ones coming up in chapter 1, as Runciter is at the moratorium visiting with his half-life wife, and we read a business crisis of some sort, he theorized. Ads over TV and in the homeopapes by the various anti-psi Prudence establishments had shrilly squawked their harangues of late. Defend your privacy, the ads yammered on the hour from all media. Is a stranger tuning in on you? So that's telepathy in some way. Are you really alone? Well, that's for the telepaths. And then on the queasy worry about precogs, precognition. Are your actions being predicted by someone you've never met? Someone you would not want to meet or invite into your home? So here's the pitch then. Terminate anxiety. Contacting your nearest Prudence organization will first tell you if in fact you are the victim of unauthorized intrusions. Then on your instructions, nullify these intrusions at a moderate cost to you. And so this is Herbert Fogelsong thinking about it, and he says, Prudence organizations. He liked the term, it had dignity, and it was accurate. He knew this from personal experience. 2 years ago, a telepath had infiltrated his moratorium staff for reasons he'd never discovered, right? So the telepath had not been located, but had been nullified exactly as the TV ads promised, and so eventually the defeated telepath had gone away. The moratorium was now psi-free. In order to make sure it stayed so, the anti-psi Prudence organization surveyed his establishment routinely once a month. Now, he points out a problem with this. Of course, Herbert thought musingly to himself, I took their word for it that a telepath got in here. They showed me a graph they'd obtained, citing it as proof. Maybe they faked it, made up the graph in their own labs, and I took their word for it that the telepath left. He came, he left, and I paid 2,000 postcreds. Could the Prudence organizations be, in fact, rackets, claiming a need for their services when sometimes no need actually exists? And that doesn't get explored any further. Runciter Associates certainly doesn't seem to be doing that, but perhaps some others are. Then in chapter 4, we're going to get a little bit more discussion of this going on. There's a conversation between Ms. Frick and Glenn Runciter, and he says, how often do our ads run on primetime TV planet-wide? Still once every third hour? And he's told, not quite that, Mr. Runciter. Over the course of a full day, Prudence ads appear on average of once every third hour per UHF channel, but the cost of prime time, and Runciter says, I want them to run every hour. Ella thinks that would be better. And he's thinking about which of the ads he likes the most. He says, you know that recent Supreme Court ruling where a husband can legally murder his wife if he can prove she wouldn't under any circumstances give him a divorce? Yes, the so-called, I don't care what it's called. What matters is that we have a TV ad made up on that already. How does that ad go? I've been trying to remember it. And he learns, there's this man and ex-husband being tried. First comes a shot of the jury, then the judge, then a pan-up on the prosecuting attorney cross-examining the ex-husband. He says, it would seem, sir, that your wife, Runciter says, that's right. He'd originally helped write the ad. It was, in his opinion, another manifestation of the marvelous multifacetedness of his mind. Is it not the assumption? And then they go on into a different discussion, right? So they're thinking about these advertisements that they're relying on. Now, in chapter 4, we also are going to learn about this map room, which they were talking about a little bit earlier in chapter 1. And he is going to talk about the fact that they actually have the locations of all of the inertials of the Prudence organizations and the size. So not just their one organization, but all of the other ones, because they're going to be working together on a higher level in a society. And we also find out, it's kind of interesting, there's a reference here about the society, and it reads, legally speaking, Runciter Associates was required to notify the society that some of the missing size, if not all, had been found. But he had 5 days in which to file the notification, and he decided to wait until the last day. Why? This kind of business opportunity happens once in a lifetime. What is the business opportunity? They have perhaps, as it's going to turn out, that's not actually the case, located a psi who has fallen off the map, one of Hollis's best guys, this Melopone fellow, and now they think they know where he is. So they can nullify him and get a great, cost out of it to the client. So that's the first real discussion of the society. Then in chapter 7, after it seems like Runciter has been killed and the rest of the team has survived, and Joe and Al are now in charge, effectively, Joe delegating some tasks to him, it's a question of, well, what are they going to do? So Joe says, now we get Hollis. And Al says, we won't get him. And then Joe says, the society. He broke off the owner of the moratorium and sidled into the lounge, right? And they have to decide what they're going to do. So Al says, take a hotel room here in Zurich, disappear. I'll go back to the ship, tell the others. I'll report to the society. You can delegate it to me in writing. And it's going to turn out that the society will take a pretty active role. This is in chapter 10. We find out the society is actually called the Prudent Society. No big surprise because it's a society of prudence organizations. And Joe is thinking, I wonder who authorized the transfer of Runciter from Zurich to Des Moines, right? And we find out that it was the decision of Ella Runciter in Coldpack. Des Moines is where Runciter was originally from. And then we learn, right, that the Prudent Society is taking an active role. Many of us are here. Don Denny said Mr. Len Nigelman, Prudent Society chairman, approached us in New York and informed us he'd heard of Glenn Runciter's death. He informed us that the body of the deceased was being brought here to Des Moines, and he said we ought to come here, and we agreed. So he brought us in his ship. This is his ship. Denny indicated the ship out of which he'd stepped. We appreciated him notifying us of the change of location from the moratorium in Zurich to the mortuary here. Several of us are not here, however, because they weren't at the firm's New York offices. I refer in particular to inertials Al Hammond, Wendy Wright, and the firm's field tester, Mr. Chip. And this is on the news. And then we learned something else about that as well. Ray Hollis, whose psionically talented personnel are the object of inertial nullification, hence the target of the Prudence organizations, said today in a statement released by his office that he regretted the accidental death of Glenn Runciter and would, if possible, attend the funeral services in Des Moines. It may be, however, that Len Nigelman, representing the Prudent Society, will ask that he be barred in view of the implication on the part of some Prudence organization spokesmen that Hollis originally reacted to news of Runciter's death with ill-disguised relief, right? And Joe's thinking, maybe Runciter is dead. The TV people think so. Ray Hollis thinks so. So does Len Nigelman, right? So there's a lot of interconnections there. As it turns out, Runciter isn't dead, and we see Runciter in chapter 14 deciding whether he's going to file his report with the Prudence organization. He's worn out. He's been consulting with his staff, who are all now in Coldpack half-life, and he calls Nigelman, this Prudence Society chairman, and says, Len, I can't do any more today. I've spent the last 12 hours trying to get through to my people in Coldpack, and I'm exhausted. Would tomorrow be okay? Nigelman says, the sooner you file your official formal statement with us, the sooner we can begin action against Hollis. My legal department says it's open and shut. They're champing at the bit. They think they can make a civil charge stick? Civil and criminal. They've been talking to the New York District Attorney, but until you make a formal notarized report to us, and then Runciter says, tomorrow, after I get some sleep, this damn near has finished me off. The loss of all my best people, he said to himself, especially Joe Chip. My organization is depleted and we won't be able to resume commercial operations for months, maybe years. Where am I going to get inertials to replace those I've lost? Where am I going to find a tester like Joe? And Nigelman says, sure, Glenn, get a good night's sleep. Meet me in my office tomorrow, say 10 o'clock our time. And that's, the end of that interaction and the end of the discussion of the society and Prudence organizations. But you can see that they play a pretty important role, absolutely central role. You couldn't have a story without them of this sort, right? And so there's this kind of competitive arms race between organizations like that of Ray Hollis, employing size, and then these Prudence defensive organizations that are having to look out for themselves, but also for all of their clients, and then they're in turn protected by, or their interests are advanced by, the Prudence Society.